Hey there, I'm Shane. Today I'm going to be talking about how I set up my Sony cameras, specifically my Sony a7R3 and my Sony a7iii, all the settings that I use, diving into each nitty-gritty detail of the menu system, how I program my buttons, and ultimately how I use my camera. So I've been shooting on Sony cameras for quite a few years now, and I've really grappled with the menu systems, I think would be a good way to put it, over the years, and really kind of have finally come to terms with how I like to set the cameras up in the most optimal way for myself, that I can both change my settings quickly on the fly, but also kind of switch between photos and videos with minimal discomfort and the kind of max performance I can get out these cameras. So in this video, I'm going to go page by page through the menu system, talking about each setting that I have and why I have it that way, and really just darn exciting stuff. So I really hope you're excited, because you know what? I'm excited for this riveting video, but I hope it's helpful, and I really enjoy these cameras. But I think the barrier to entry for kind of how many settings there are can be a little bit daunting to new users. So yeah, I hope this helps out a bit. So before I dive too deep into the video, I want to talk about a bit of nomenclature that I'm going to be using frequently in this video. I'm going to be referring to the main menu tabs along the top as tabs. So those big colorful options along the top, I'm going to be calling those tabs. And then within those tabs, each page, like the numbered pages, I'm going to be calling pages. This way I'm going to hopefully stay consistent with the way I describe where I am in the menu system, and hopefully that will add some continuity to this video. Please forgive me if I make a mistake here and there. I'm going to try and stay as consistent as I can, but just so you know what I'm talking about when I say a tab or a page. So I know I said I'm going to go through page by page, but I'm going to start off with the most important stuff first, and that is my button layout. So immediately what I'm going to do is hop into the menu system and go to tab 2 and then go to page 8. On page 8, we have these custom key modes. So the first one I'm going to go into is custom key with the little image of a photo beside it, because this is the menu system where the photo settings are in. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to just go through what each thing does. So the first thing here is the control wheel. I have this set up to be my ISO. So this way, while I'm going through my photos, I can, like my photography, I can change my ISO at a whim. This just is a quicker response. By default, this is set to nothing, but I like to have it as my ISO. I have custom button 1, C1, which is on the top of the camera, set to be my crop mode. So on my a7iii, I have this set to be nothing, but on my a7R3, I have it set to my crop mode. I have it set to this mainly because when I do need to crop in, I'd like to have that extra little reach. It helps with your autofocusing, especially if you're doing stuff on birds. But when you're on the a7R3, you still get an extra 18 megapixel image, which is still very printable. So I find myself using it a lot, therefore it's C1. C2 there is my focus area. So this is basically how I like to focus. So I can change it to the full mode, flexible little points, and this way on the fly I can easily change my focus settings. Next up is custom mode 3, which is in the back left corner of the camera. This is my AF toggle, just so in case my lens doesn't have a switch on it, I can do that. C4, the trash can, is set up to monitor brightness. That way, if it's a sunny day, I can easily change the brightness on my camera. Moving on to the second page, my multi-select center button, so that's the little joystick, I have that set to register AF area on. So this actually isn't what it is indicated to be. It's a custom autofocus area. However, if you have it set to the center point button, what it does is does center point autofocus, which is awesome. So if you're coming from a DSLR, this will feel like having a single autofocus point when you use like the center cross type point. I came from Canon, so a lot of these settings are kind of tailored towards a Canon user, and I find it really useful having that. My center button is my focus magnifier for when I'm in video or when I'm using manual focus. It allows me to punch in on the image. The left button, which is just like left on the circular pad, is set up to drive mode. So if I want to be in burst, high speed burst, single photo, a timer delay, all those things, that allows me to do that. My right button, so right on the control wheel, this is what allows me to basically change my white balance. It's a little misleading because on the camera it says ISO, because by default it's ISO. I like to have it be my white balance though, so that while I'm in video, I can easily change my white balance on the fly. The last one here is my silent shooting mode. I like to be able to go into silent shooting mode very quickly, because during a wedding reception or something where it can be clapping all of a sudden and then I don't need to use the silent shutter, or it can be very quiet and I want to use the silent shutter. I can choose between that quickly. On the third page here, I have the AEL button. This is set up to be my autofocus button. Whatever focus mode I'm in, this is set to be AF on. AF on. And then counterintuitively, my AF on button I have set to interval shooting, because I do a lot of time lapses and I just find it a pain in the butt to dive into my menus every time to change my interval settings. So it used to be IAF, AF on. However, AF on now in the last Sony update also is IAF, so it's kind of redundant. So that's what I have it for now. I find myself changing this button specifically quite often. And then the focus hold button, which is like the buttons on the camera lenses which have it, which the 85, which is on my camera now, has this setting. This basically allows me to do the center point autofocus thing that I was mentioning that my joystick does as well, which I find very useful. So going back now, I'm going to go into my video custom key modes. So most of these are the same as my photos, but a few of them I have different. Most importantly though, is my custom button 1. So I have this button set up to the memory 1 and 2 button. So this allows me to save my settings to one of my custom modes. So on the dial on the top of the camera, I can have my settings be saved to one of those. This allows me to on the fly easily, quickly change my settings. And when I'm in the field, if I'm shooting, for instance, a wedding, I'm able to just swap my settings super quickly, which I find super helpful. For the longest time, I struggled with how to use these custom modes well, and I find this is actually the easiest way for me. And I change my settings often, so this is perfect. So that's probably one of the highest recommendations I have from any of this stuff I talk about in this video. All my other buttons are the same, except for since C1, I switched to be my memory button while I'm in video, because I often am in manual focus and you don't need autofocus. I have the AEL button switched to be my crop sensor mode, so to punch into Super 35 mode. In video, I do this all the time, and it's an incredible feature. So I have that set to the APS-C mode, and then the AF on button I have set to zoom, because sometimes APS-C mode just doesn't get you far enough. I use the zoom functionality of the camera to use the clear image zoom to punch in further, which still gets you quite a usable image. It's not insanely sharp anymore, but you can go like 1.5 times farther into the image. So that's all my video settings. In terms of my playback settings, I do have a custom setup for it. Custom button 1 rotates my image, so that way in case the camera didn't intelligently rotate the image for me, I can do so myself manually. Custom button 2 will pull to the image index. This will just allow me to kind of take a step backwards and look at all the images like at a whole. The C3 button, which normally would be the locking button, I actually changed to the rating button. I find this awesome for when I'm at a wedding or with a client, that I can easily have them look at the photos with me and they can kind of tell me which ones they like, and I can rate those. And when I pull them into Lightroom afterwards, they have that rating in the camera. And this is just super handy because you can do it super quickly and it's super on the fly. And then I have the function buttons as send to smartphone, so I can just send it over Wi-Fi quickly. It's pretty self-explanatory, I think, in that regards. So that's it for all the button layout. The next thing is the menu settings. So over time, I've been trying to use the function menu more. The function menu is the little menu that pops up when you hit the function button on the back of the camera. And you can see them all here, what I have them set to, but I'll go into the menu to show you actually. So if we go over to the function menu set, I have the upper one set as focus peaking display. Function upper 2 set up to picture profile for when I'm in video, when I want to switch between my picture profiles. Upper 3 is set up to be my gamma assist. So this is a setting that helps you kind of turn the log profile into just a more standard 709 profile. I find this really helpful for when I'm trying to get my white balance correct, because the S log is terribly hard to get a perfect white balance in while you're looking at the ungraded footage. So I find having the gamma assist helps out a lot, but sometimes you don't always want it on because you can't tell when stuff is blown out. So it's easy to have a quick toggle for that. The next thing is upper 4, which is the zebra display. Pretty self-explanatory. It shows you when you're clipping. Function 5 is for the AF track sensitivity for when I want to have increased sensitivity or decreased sensitivity depending on the subject. For an interview, I usually like to have it in the middle. For a wedding, I like to have it in the middle. I honestly don't know a situation where I don't like to have it in the middle. However, if I wanted to change it, I have the option. And then the last one is actually the one I probably use most. 6 is subject detection, because I like taking pictures of my dog and I like being able to turn on the dog autofocus. And the subject detection is awesome for that, because yeah, who doesn't like their dog? And then on the page 2, this is the bottom row. So I have the peaking level for if I want to have a high, medium, or low. That priority set in white balance. This is kind of handy because you can turn it to like the ambient white, the underwater white, or the regular white, which is just handy for what situation you're in. Quite frankly, I almost always keep it just in the default white, but the ambient white is kind of nice if you want to get a more sterile look to your photos and you know you're going to be in an actual white environment, like a studio like this or something like that. The next one is just the white balance. For obvious reasons, white balance is handy to change, and I know I have it on the focus wheel, but it's nice to have here too. The next one is audio record level. I find this like absolutely necessary to have, because especially if you're using like some of the newer microphones, they don't have it on the camera, like the small like itty bitty Rode mics. You can't control it on the actual mic. Like this Deity mic I'm using thankfully has a dial on the back, but even my Sennheiser wireless mics don't have that. So having the ability to change it on the fly is handy. Next up in lower 5 is the live view display. So this basically allows you to like see while you have flash on what the image would look like without the settings that you're applying, because sometimes you're having your image stop down super low in live display is not the best thing. And when you're doing astrophotography, the same thing, time lapses, you don't always want to have the live view with like the super long shutter. So it is handy to have this here. And the last one is the focus mode. So this is either in single point focus or continuous. I almost always keep my camera in continuous autofocus, but there's a toggle here for say when I'm doing macro photography where I just want to have single point autofocus and I have the camera lock off. So that is all my function menus. The next up is the dial setup. I believe I shoot goofy. It's been so long since I used another person's camera that I remember, but I have my front one set to my aperture and my back dial set to my shutter speed. please tell me if I'm normal or not. I forget. I don't think I am. And then the rotation is like if you want to have it goofy or the normal direction. At least I'm normal in that regards. But that's it for the button setup. Now let's get into the really, really exciting stuff. So go ahead back to page 1 now and start off at the very beginning. So the first setting that I have is I always shoot in RAW, so I have my images just set to RAW only. I shoot in compressed RAW. I'm going to hopefully make a future video on this, but ultimately I don't see any benefit in shooting in uncompressed RAW. There is no real benefit in the post-production, in my opinion, so I shoot in compressed. The JPEG quality is extra fine. I don't shoot in JPEG ever, so it doesn't matter. And then I have it set to low compression and like the high image quality. My aspect ratio I have set to 3:2, which is the full sensor. If you have it 16:9, you're actually cropping some of your image. And then the Super 35 mode is just manual. I have it set up as everything default. Long exposure noise reduction can be useful in some situations. However, I have it turned off because it actually takes quite a while. It takes the same time it does to take the photo. So if you take a 30-second photo, it can take 30 seconds to get that noise reduction removed, and I don't have time for that. I'll do it in post. The color space I have set to sRGB, and the lens compensation I haven't changed. Onto page 3. My drive mode I have it set up to single shooting, but this depends as what I'm doing. I have this in the left button on my wheel, as I said earlier. I do change this often. My bracket settings, this is not something I ever use. It's basically for when you're doing an HDR photo, but I don't shoot in HDR almost ever, so I don't touch that. The pixel shift mode, again, I don't use this either, so I never find myself changing these settings. The memory 1 and the memory record, this is for when you're recording your video settings. It's what I have pre-programmed to C1 while I'm in video, so I don't touch this. I by default always shoot to slot 1 for my memory card because that's my faster card. Register custom shooting settings. This is just for your custom modes again, which I don't need to touch. And then interval shooting functions, I change as I need to. So I'm going to just leave them as they are right now. I actually have a whole video I'm making on that about time lapses. I might have it up or not, but if I don't, I'll put it in the description. And then moving on to page 5. My focus mode, as I said, I almost stay in continuous autofocus all the time. Because I have the AEL button set to autofocus on, I can use that as my back button autofocus to always turn on when I need it. My shutter button does nothing, which I'll show you how to change that setting after, but back button autofocus is my preferred way to shoot. My priority setting in single shot is AF. This just is basically what you care about. You care about the settings or the AF. AF is what I care about. AFC, I have balanced emphasis. This is basically just like where it's gonna meter, like when you're taking the photo or when you hit the button. I don't use either, so it doesn't matter to me. My focus area usually is zone AF. But really it depends on the day. Sometimes I use the full AF or I just use manual point and I just move it around the screen as I need to. My focus settings, this is just for where you have it. I don't care about that. And then moving on to the next thing, switch vertical horizontal. This is for when you flip your camera upwards or sideways and when it changes the axis of the autofocus area. I don't have the setting turned on because I often am like moving my autofocus area quick enough. However, it can be handy if you find yourself in a studio and you have it like locked to the center and you want it to rotate so it's still in the same composition. It's hard to explain. I don't use it. I don't recommend it terribly, but if you're doing stuff like that, it might be useful. Going on to page 6, AF illuminator. This is for like on the front of your camera. When that little red light turns on when you autofocus, this is good for in the dark, or when you want to indicate that you're actually taking an image for a client. I have this turned off because I find it incredibly annoying. Center lock on AF, this is basically for when you're using the lock on AF mode. I have this turned off, I don't use it. My face and eye AF settings, they added this menu and added to it in the 3.0 update, so it might look a little different on your camera. I'm on an a7R III with the update. I always have AF turned on, just because I find myself always shooting that. If I need to be more clinical, I'll move into manual focus. My subject detection set to human, I often change that. I always have it show detect frame display. So this means that if it sees an eye in the scene, it will show you which one it's going to lock onto. I find this really useful for when I have a crowd and I want to know that I am going to lock on to the person I intend to take the photo of. The next thing is the animal eye display, exact same situation. If it sees an animal's eyeball, it's going to display that it's going to focus on that eyeball. Back to page 6. I have track sensitivity set to the default of 3. I've played with it on high and low, and I just like kind of the standard. If you turn it up to too high, sometimes it can be like jittery and you almost miss focus because it's just moving too quickly for you. And then AF with shutter is probably one of the most important settings. I have this set to off because I use my back button to focus. I don't use my shutter button. Some people vouch to say that the shutter button is better. This is a little bit more of like not really old fashioned, it's just a preference, but I like to not have that turned on because I feel like I have more control over my shutter when I have it controlled by my thumb rather than my index finger. In this way I can focus and recompose, which is what I used to do all the time on my Canon. So it just might be my old habits, but anyways, that's what I prefer. I have per AF turned on. This basically will be like having the video autofocus always on, that it's hunting for the subject in the scene. I don't like this, I have it turned off. Register area AF, this is for like your little thumb button thing that I use. I have that turned off, I don't want that. Occasionally you have to delete the registered AF area because it can move while you're using your thumb button or the focus hold button on the camera. I do that routinely. All that does is just returns the AF area from the center button back to the middle of the frame. Even mine's a little bit off for some reason again. I'll figure that out later. AF area auto clear, this will be when you turn your camera on and off that it clears, and display continuous AF area. So that's like while you're going like this, it will show you the area that's autofocusing on. I like having that on. Onto page 8, phase detect area. So this tells you on your screen here, you can see like there's a little bit of the little like brackets on the screen almost, you can see. I like having that on because this allows me to actually see where my phase detect points are, because they don't cover the full frame on the a7R III. So this tells me where my autofocus is going to be most accurate. So I leave that on. In AF micro adjustments, I don't touch any of this. On to page 9. Nothing on page 9 I actually mess around with. Your ISO is just like changing your ISO settings. My control wheel does this, so I don't need to worry about that. The minimum shutter speed for ISO, this is for when you're in an auto mode. I shoot exclusively in manual usually, so I have never changed this setting. Metering mode I have set to multi. This is the default. This is just for when it is picking auto ISO, which I do use occasionally. It will basically allow you to kind of decide what part of the scene. Multi just means that the camera is going to decide for you, so I trust the camera most times. Face priority, it means that if there's a face in the scene, it will focus on that face. Yes, I want to do that. Spot metering, quite frankly, I don't know what this setting does. I haven't changed any of these before. My flash mode, this is for if you have a flash connected to the hot shoe. Flash fill will just mean it's the setting. This is the default. I haven't touched it. And I only use external flash in manual, like in my studio here. So I haven't actually messed with any of these settings. My white balance I have set to auto for when I'm taking photos. In video, it's set to manual, but For photos, unless I'm doing some nighttime or long exposure time lapses, I have it set to auto. I have the priority set to standard. You can set it to ambient white, which I do find helps out quite a bit. However, I shot like that for a while and I found it kind of made my images too warm in ambient, and in white it actually kind of messed with my skin tones. So I just kept it in standard at the end of the day. I haven't touched my DRO Auto HDR mode. Quite frankly, I don't know what this does, never used it before. I have my settings set to neutral, just because I like the most neutral image possible. My picture profile I have set to off. I only edit that when I'm in video. My focus magnifier lasts for 5 seconds. So when I want to go into manual focus and I crop in on a part, it will last for 5 seconds and then it will automatically zoom out of the image again, just like that. And I find that's the kind of, if I don't get focus in that time, I'm doing something wrong. So hopefully I can do it in 5 seconds, maybe. But if I need to again, I can just punch in again. The initial focus magnifier, so this is like for what it will focus to. I just have it set to the default of 1. The AF focus auto. So this is actually, I think it's on by default when you pop into manual focus. So if I'm going into my camera here and I go into manual focus, if I turn my focus wheel, it's going to automatically punch in for me. So I find this really useful because that way I can easily see what I'm trying to focus on. It can get a little annoying if you want to be shooting quickly and you don't want to punch in constantly. This is the setting you can turn off. I almost always leave it on though, because I want to punch in to make sure I'm getting critical focus, especially when you have such a sharp lens as the 85mm. If you miss focus, it's really obvious, unfortunately, sometimes. AF assist, that's just basically meaning that it's gonna punch in for you. So it's basically that. Peaking settings, this is going to be like how much your focus peaking turns on when you're in manual focus. I have it set to on. I have it always set to high usually, just because I find it is fine on high. I can see the edges unless it's like a furry object. High is usually good. And I have the color set to red, just because red was what I was used to when I was using Magic Lantern on my Canon 60 back in the day. The anti-flicker shoot I have turned off. This is for with the frequency of lights in the room, I use constant lighting most of the time, and if I'm in an environment where I need to compensate for flickering, I just change my shutter speed myself. Face registration I've turned off, and registered face priority, for some reason I have that turned on. I want that off. I don't register anyone's faces. I shoot so many people's faces, I don't want it confusing people ever. We're on to tab 2. Onto video function. Super exciting. But I have my video function set to manual always. So if I were to pop into video mode, like C1 I have set to video here. It's gonna boot me on my monitor. I'm gonna have to go back. I apologize for that. If I do move over to video mode, here video mode. Pardon me. Okay, I can do this. We are going to go back to C. So you're going to imagine. I have my video mode set to manual. I have my picture format. I change this all the time, but right now it's set up to 4K with a highest bit rate of 24 at 100 megabyte per second. My S&Q settings, I'm not going to talk about these because I do not use S&Q mode. So we're going to leave it because I don't like it. My proxy settings, I don't record proxies because my computer thankfully so far is able to keep up with the Sony files. But if you do have a slower computer, fret not, because you can turn on the proxies, which saves a redundant file at a lower bit rate, which makes it easier for a computer to edit. And then when you export, you can export the settings that you put on your proxy as the actual settings on the video. So it's just a handy thing to increase a workflow. I have my AF speed in video set to normal. Again, I'm often in manual focus, but when I'm having a talking head video like this, I can't have it in manual focus. So I have it set to normal. My track speed is set to standard. slow shutter is for when you're in an auto mode for video. I don't even know if I've ever used this setting before, but what it does is it will get your shutter speed as low as it possibly can, so it will automatically try and make your image as pleasing as possible. So that's pretty nice. The auto recording I keep on because I like to record audio, and my audio level is set to whatever my mic can do, and I like having the display to show my audio levels at the bottom of the screen. Ooh, I skipped a couple pages, sorry. Back onto page 3. The audio out timing, I want it to be shown live. I don't want a delay on this. This is the default. The wind noise reduction I find can be a little too finicky and not useful, so I have this turned off. The marker display just tells you if you're recording or not, and like the clipping, I don't have this turned on. And then this is for while you're in the video to show your margins. I do like having this one on. This is for actually centering my frame. I often actually shoot in an aspect ratio of 2:1. There is no setting for this, so I have it set to 1.66 to 1, which basically is like just a nicer aspect ratio that I usually like to see at least the bars on my screen. So it's personal preference, but I find it useful for framing my subject in video. And then the light video mode, I don't quite frankly know what this would do. And then the movie with shutter. So this means that when I hit the shutter button while I'm in a video mode, it will record. I find this useful because sometimes the record button is hard to hit, and I can just hit the shutter button if I want to record. So on to page 4. The first setting on this page is your silent shooting. I had this set to a button on my camera, so I do use this setting a lot, but I toggle it. So sometimes you want it on, sometimes you want it off. The electronic front curtain shutter I have on. So what this means is when my camera takes a picture, when it takes the first action of the shutter, it's going to be an electronic shutter, and then it's going to drop the shutter as my second shutter. This can mess up with your bokeh in some extreme light situations, and also if you're shooting very fast. However, I like to have this on because it's less wear and tear on my shutter, and I don't notice a huge difference in my images I get. Releasing your shutter without your lens on, you don't need to have this on, and releasing without a card, you don't need to have this on either. They're useless settings, quite frankly. And I just have them on, I think, for the heck of it. I don't know if I use them. Steady shot I always leave on because I like having the stabilization on my lens and my camera. You get better images, and I just have all the settings set to default. The zoom modes, this is for your digital zoom. I have it set to optical zoom only. You'd have to be in a video setting to use this, but I find this really useful because I don't want to have any weird cropping on my image, so it's only going to go in as far as it actually can, so 1.5 times. Any further is going to be degrading your image quality. On to page 6, the display button. All this does is just tell you like what's going to show up on your screen. I don't have my distance indicator set up in my view on my monitor. I display all info modes. So this basically just tells you all the stuff. This takes away all the stuff on your screen, your histogram, your level. I find the level actually the most useful thing ever, just because it's handy. You can always turn. I don't have the 4 viewfinder, so this basically gives you like all the settings that you'd expect to have on the back of your camera. Like when you're using a DSLR, if you had the viewfinder on, I don't really care about that. And monitor off is actually basically just turns your display off if you cycle through enough settings. This is useful, but I don't really care that much for it, so I leave it off because I only turn it on when I need it. For the viewfinder, I have the level again because I find that super useful. The histogram, because sometimes it's nice to have a histogram if your eyes aren't working the best. I don't have the best eyes on the planet, so the histogram can help me sometimes. In the display no info is what I often use the most because it just gets rid of everything on the screen. Onto the viewfinder frame rate. So this isn't a setting that's on the a7iii, it's only on the a7R III. I have it set to high. It basically just will change the frame rate to a higher frame rate, which makes the images feel smoother. I personally just prefer it. It burns the battery quicker, but I have enough batteries. The zebra settings, these I change so often, so I'm not going to delve into these right now. It just depends on where your images clip, but I think I have mine set to over 107, which basically is just where I prefer to edit at, and how I like to have my whites in the image. So it's not something that's terribly important. It depends on the actual picture profile you're in. I shoot an S-Log2, and I don't think that's a proper setting for it, but I'm just used to it now, so that's what I use. I have actually a grid on my screen usually that shows me the rule of thirds, which is off actually right now for some reason. The reason I have this is mainly as a joke, because my one friend says all my images are composed to the left. So I'm trying my damnedest to fix that issue. So I've been using the rule of thirds to stop myself. I don't need any recommendations from the camera, so I don't have any recommendations on from the camera. The live view display, this means that if I'm having my settings actually show up, I always have them on. That's the point of having a mirrorless in my opinion, so I leave it on. Continuous shooting length, this tells you for how long you've been holding down the shutter. I don't really care for this setting because I usually either am counting how many images I take, but if I'm going that quickly, it's arbitrary at that point. I don't need to know the time. Auto review I have turned off. So after I take a picture, it doesn't show up on the screen. I don't like that setting just because I like to just keep going. I find if I get stopped by looking at my images, I stop too often. So this is an easy way to just keep myself in the moment and keep on taking those images. We already covered all the stuff on page 8 and on page 9. This isn't really anything that exciting. Lock operation parts, this basically just would, I believe, while you're in video mode, prevent you from changing any of your settings. I do like to change the settings sometimes, so I actually leave that off. Audio signals, I like to be able to hear when I'm recording or not, so it will give me a little beep. This is mainly just for peace of mind, so I don't forget that I'm recording, because more often than not, I sometimes forget, and it's the most traumatizing thing if you forget to hit record. And the movie button mode only works in movie mode, so that way you don't automatically get booted to a movie mode if you're taking images and you accidentally hit the movie button. So moving on to tab 3, we're in the home stretch now, thankfully. So the send to smart home function, this is basically how it sends to it. You can send the original, the proxy. I change between these. Usually I like to have the original, but you can also send the proxy file, which is a smaller image. But it really just depends on your preference and if you want to send like a huge RAW or a JPEG over. Sending to the computer, this one is basically sending like bigger things over to a computer. The FTP, this is for if you're, again, in a studio and you have a server set up with Wi-Fi. I don't have that. I'm not that fancy, so it does nothing for me. Controlling with your smartphone, your smartphone. This is basically for using the Sony Play Memories app thing. This allows you to control with the smartphone. I only do this if I'm like traveling and I want to take a selfie somewhere. I don't often use this setting. Airplane modes I always leave off. Sometimes it's nice to conserve battery. However, I usually am not a battery conscious individual because the Sony batteries are great. My Wi-Fi settings, I have everything here set to default. Literally everything is default here. So I never changed any of the settings. And then I don't have a Bluetooth remote, so I can't turn that on. And look at that, we're already on tab 4. In Playback, I have nothing changed here. And then Playback 2, page 2, I have nothing changed here as well. And then hear me out. On page 3, I changed nothing either. And on page 4, I have nothing changed either. Quite frankly, I've never used this function of the interval mode playback. I just cycle through them very quickly. The setup one, so I have the most important setting here is my gamma display assist. I almost always shoot in S-Log2, but when I do shoot in HLG, which is my preferred other format for if it's like really dark or something, I use that, but having it in auto just will automatically switch to it if you change your mode, such as if I go right now to change to picture profile 7, which is S-Log, it will automatically compensate and go to S-Log assist mode, which I find very useful. I'm going to actually change out of that before I forget. So that's a handy little trick. My volume settings, this just depends on like what setting you're in. Usually I have it set to medium just in case I need to turn it up. I have not changed that. You need to confirm to delete. A single button to delete is scary business. I have my display quality set to standard. You can set it to high. This just burns more battery on the A7R3. On the a7iii, this isn't an option. The power saving mode I have set to after 5 minutes rather than 1 minute, because I find I often will be standing around and my camera will shut off on me. So 5 minutes I find is better. The temperature speed, like if it will automatically turn off if it overheats, I have set to standard. I've never had my camera, knock on wood, overheat on me and turn itself off, so I've never needed to use this setting, thank goodness. The cleaning mode is nice because this will shake your sensor. I haven't changed any of the settings here. I always have touch turned on, even if it's cold, because sometimes I just like to use it. Touch panel, this basically just means that if you're changing your focus mode, you can use your thumb or you can use the touch panel. None of these settings here I have changed. Again, on this page, I have it set that when I plug it into a computer, it always goes to mass storage rather than auto, just because it's quicker and I only ever use mass storage on a computer. Everything else here I have the same. The time and date I have set up to be the time and date. The copyright info I have set to my copyright info. This is for obvious reasons. I like to copyright my work in camera. It makes it easier on the back end. In case someone takes my RAWs, at least I have a little bit of metadata on there to prove that it's mine. The media record settings, everything here is default. I haven't messed with any of this. This is just for checking what version your camera is running on. I'm on version 3.0. I know it's out of date. I think there's 3.01, but I'm a bad person. The last thing is my custom modes. So on this menu here, these are just the ones that I've chosen to be added to my favorites. These ones are really arbitrary. I don't spend a lot of time in my favorites menu. The most important one here is interval shooting function. That way I can quickly get to my interval mode, just so I can change on and off. Formatting is handy because that way in case I want to wipe my cards all of a sudden on the fly, or if a card's acting up on me, I can format it quickly. My media record settings, this is just like if I want to change to slot 1 or the slot 2. But more importantly, if I want to do redundant recording, I can easily go do that by simultaneous. This is what I do for weddings or client work. I always record to both cards in case a card fails on me. So it's nice to have that setting kind of quickly available. Finder/monitor, this is for if I want to toggle between the viewfinder or the monitor and my hands are too cold, and usually the situation is ice gets in the little display thing on the camera, and that way it doesn't automatically switch for me and it always is looking at the viewfinder. So in these situations I like having it to be changed quickly because I get really angry because it's usually pretty cold out. And then the audio record level and the volume settings are quite self-explanatory. I need to change those quickly. Picture profile, again, I like to have it in all the places. HDMI settings is for this video, in fact, so that my camera records what's on the screen onto my external monitor. So it's very useful for that. Long exposure noise reduction, again, I don't like using it, and accidentally if I turn it on, I can change it quickly here. In ISO, in case for some reason my camera breaks, I want to be able to change this quickly. So this is an emergency setting that I keep here for emergencies. And then that's it. We made it through the whole video. My goodness, that was a long video. I appreciate you watching the whole thing. I hope it was useful. I know this was a pretty boring video, and it's just basically here just to help anyone out who was wondering how I set up my cameras. So thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I hope it was useful. You don't need to worry. I think this will be the only time I make a video like this. So you don't need to torture yourself again. But anyways, I hope you have an awesome day. If you enjoyed this video for some reason, please consider subscribing, and leave a comment about, your favorite part. I'm joking, please don't do that. But anyways, have a good one. See ya.